Welcome to the guide on the fundamentals of commercial real estate. This will give people background into what exactly the commercial real estate industry involves. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. As a commercial real estate professional, I've provided expert guidance for about 20 years now to individuals and corporations, both private and institutional, and have been doing this full time throughout that period. I have a business degree from City University of New York. I've been certified by MIT in real estate analysis and investments. Here's a summarized list of the brands we've helped over the years. So what we're going to go over in this course briefly is we're going to go over the definition of what commercial real estate is, some of the terminology that you're going to need to familiarize yourself with. We'll go over the leasing process, the sales process, and then we're going to finish by going over some of the financing options and how that works on the commercial side. Please like this video if you found it helpful. What is commercial real estate? Commercial means done for the sake of profit. It's an adjective that first appeared in the 1600s discussing commerce. Not all of it is done specifically for profit. We represent a lot of nonprofits. You can get into churches and special use, but for the most part, you can distinguish this separate from other forms of real estate from that definition alone. We're going to be covering mostly retail and office. It's so much more than that, and we're going to dive in a little deeper into exactly what that means. How does commercial real estate differ from residential real estate? There are a lot of factors that make important distinguishments, but for this, even though there's a lot of similarities, the contract terms are longer. Your closing, your due diligence, those can be extended up to sometimes 6 months or to a year with development projects. Many of these get done in 30 to 60 day increments, as similar to residential. The contracts are also customized to each property. It's very common to see a lease agreement that could be 65 pages. And the valuation models are different on the sales side. They're mostly based on capitalization. Marketing is also very different. Marketing requires demographics on a lot of the commercial real estate, which is different from residential, because we're taught in residential to kind of stay away from the demographic side. It's used from a business standpoint to understand the incomes, the projections, and if their brand will even fit. Transactions can take longer than residential real estate. We've done some buildings that take up to a year to close. So it just depends on the use and the type. The question I get most often is about commissions. The commission structure is similar, but also a little different in the sense that it is always on a variable commission. What are the types of commercial? For this demonstration, we'll talk about investment use and user occupier. And user occupier, you want to think of like a physician who needs to open up their own medical practice, right? And maybe looking at a single property to do that just for their business. That's a user occupier. Okay? And then those are the two different categories, investment and user occupier. And when you get into the categories and subcategories, again, it's immense. Medical, multifamily, mixed use, office, retail, land, industrial, and it keeps going. These subcategories are endless. And the different occupants you have are corporations, associations. Again, you can have nonprofits, religious organizations, government. We do leases with the Department of Education. And then you have the different types of classes. Class A is, think of the prestigious office building. It's brand new, has beautiful lobbies and all that. That's Class A. And those have solid tenants. So think of AAA rated tenants. Those are going to go into a Class A building. Class B is just below that. It's a little older, but it still has beautiful amenities and has a lot of the benefits of the Class A, but it's a little older. Class C is typically your average shopping center that you're going to pass on your way to work, or an office building that's a little older, maybe needs a little bit of help, local tenants. Now let's discuss leasing. Leasing commercial real estate can often be more complicated than a real estate transaction on the sale side. Do not take it lightly. If someone contacts you to lease commercial real estate, it is an arduous pursuit. We'll go over a couple things. First, you have landlord representation, and then you have tenant representation. The differences are similar to that in residential, but a landlord rep is prospecting to fill vacancies. If it's an office building, for example, I'm contacting accountants or attorneys or people who would fit that office. On the prospecting on the landlord representation side, you're, again, going after those tenants for your building. You're canvassing. You go to the businesses, hand them a flyer, talk to them about the property that you have available, and you're going to these tenants and trying to get them to come over to your property that you have listed. And then you have cold calling and social media. Qualifying them, you're looking at their financials. What are their projections, right? Maybe you're representing a retail building that's great for a restaurant, and a restaurant tenant approaches you and wants to take a look at it. You need to know, what are their first year projections and sales going to be? Do they have a website, or have they done this before? Will this be their second or a third location? A lot of times what we use to qualify these tenants on the landlord rep side is asking for tax returns. That's going to help you make a determination as to whether they would be a good fit for your landlord that you represent. On the landlord side, you're going to have to understand the lease and what they're looking for. On the tenant rep side, it's about relationships. Contact and make relationships with local businesses. You can get into regionals and nationals, and it's a very lucrative position. On the qualifications, you can qualify the tenants with a business plan. If they have a business plan, that's typically going to have their projections and everything already in there, just as you would qualify them on the landlord side. This is good because when you come to another broker who represents the landlord, you can present the tenant's business plan, and then you're going to need to obtain the site selection criteria, right? What kind of demographics do they need to be in? Is there a certain traffic count that they have to have? Traffic count's very important for retail. Next, you want to locate the property and perform your due diligence. Once you locate a property for your tenant, you're going to send that over to them, make sure that it fits what they're looking for. Now, if it's medical, maybe they need an x-ray wall, or if it's retail, maybe they need a back room office for the manager. You want to go through that and weed out the properties that don't work for them. And once you've located a place for your tenant, you're going to go into negotiations. And the way to start negotiations is to submit a letter of intent, commonly referred to as LOI. LOI is going to be basically an outline of what your tenant's terms are, what they're going to offer, their deposit, who they are, and give the offer over to the landlord rep. LOIs are used in commercial real estate all the time. It is the standard. We don't go straight to contract because the contracts typically are so lengthy. We try to just get the basics out of the way first, and that's going to be done in an LOI. And then after that, your lease negotiations, you guys go back and forth and then sign a lease agreement, and that would conclude a tenant rep deal. There's a lot of different acronyms and terminologies to learn. On the leasing side, the first thing you're going to come across often is CAM. CAM stands for Common Area Maintenance, okay? That is going to be found on a lot of retail properties. So common area maintenance, you want to think of that as like the HOA, right? That you'd see in residential real estate. And CAM is the exterior costs, your landscaping, cleaning of the parking lot, restriping, painting, kind of everything on the exterior, lighting for your parking lot. All of those are covered in CAM. And that'll be disclosed usually as a cost on a per square foot basis. So you'll hear like $5 CAM. That means it's $5 per square foot annualized for the CAM costs. And then we get into the types of leases. You have triple net, gross, modified gross, percentage leases, etc. Triple net means that's a pass-through. Okay, so your net of expenses. That means the tenant moves in and pays for everything. The property insurance, the taxes, and the like. Modified gross is what most of the leases are going to be, depending on the type of commercial real estate that you're practicing. And that means the landlord pays, one or two different things, and then the tenant takes care of the rest. Your typical gross lease is the landlord pays for everything, and it's all included in one price. We don't see that as often anymore. Modified gross is where tenant and the landlord both have different costs that they pay for, and so that's what we see most often. And then you hear of TI, and if you hear of TI stands for tenant improvements, and it stands for tenant improvement allowance. When you're representing a tenant and they move in, a lot of times they're going to request in negotiations that there be an allowance for the improvements they make. Maybe it's a restaurant and they want to move in and they want to build a kitchen out, and they ask the landlord for compensation for that, because it's going to ultimately improve the landlord's space, bringing more value to their real estate. And so sometimes the landlords will provide TI, and in other instances, they might provide other types of concessions like free rent. On the sales side, you have terms like NOI, IRR. These are all different capitalization terms. You're going to hear NOI the most. That's net operating income. That's after you factor the vacancy rate or other expenses. You'll come to a NOI. Cap rate, Okay, the cap rate is basically your net operating income divided by your purchase price. And that is a good rule of thumb that a lot of the investors will use to gauge kind of what the returns are on the property. Value add is when the investor wants to purchase a building and then invest money into the building to make it look nicer and build its value. Okay, and that's called a value add. Again, this is a summarized version of terminology. You could literally fill a book with it. Selling commercial real estate. Most people want to jump right into this because it means lots of dollar signs, right? Big sales, big money. Keep in mind, although this happens on many levels, I mean, we've represented boutique office buildings for $500,000, and we've also represented office developers around $900 million. And I recommend starting small, representing local boutiques or office users that can benefit from your services. So on the analysis side, there's comp approach and then there's income approach. And comp is what you're probably used to in the residential side, which is you're using comparables in the area from a per square foot or a use case scenario to understand what those properties are selling for. On the income side, which is typically done on investment properties, the investors are buying these properties and looking at their income. They want to know how much are they going to make. That's the income approach, and that's typically what we use to value a lot of the properties that we do. If you have a listing and you're looking to sell that listing, then canvassing something that you're going to have to do. Say if you have a retail shopping center, you want to reach out to all of the investors that purchase retail shopping centers, send them your offering memorandum. Canvassing is certainly a lot different. You're going to be marketing this on sites like LoopNet and Crexy. Broker blasts are important. Qualifying buyers is another thing. You're going to be marketing a property that requires income and verification. Get some kind of snapshot statement to make sure that they can actually afford to purchase the building. The next step for a buyer would be the LOI, the summarized version of what their offer is. Due diligence on commercial real estate can be lengthy, and depending on the property, for example, if you're representing a mechanic shop, environmental reports are commonly requested, and trying to understand if it's a contaminated site. Zoning is one of the most important factors because you need to make sure that it's categorized for the use that your buyer wants. If you're buying it for medical, you need to make sure it's zoned and the city will allow medical. If there's going to be something built on the property after your buyer purchases it, then that has to be done through permitting. They have to get the correct permits for that. In order to do that, they have to talk to the city. And then closing on a commercial real estate's very similar to residential. And so as long as your due diligence and everything clears out, you get the right permitting and the buyer is satisfied, you should have a pretty easy closing. Financing commercial real estate, you can have traditional and you can also have creative financing, right? Just as you do in residential. There's the traditional loan approach, which is on the commercial side, the investor, it's considered an investment. They're typically putting about 30% down, 25 to 30% down. But they can also do SBA, right? Which is typically longer terms, usually over 90 days to 120 days before you close on a property. But it is certainly good for people who are just starting their businesses. SBA is a great program. The banks that we typically deal with, community banks, they offer more favorable terms. They're better at closing these deals as opposed to the Bank of Americas of the world. We find most of our buyers prefer community banks. And then REITs and Pure Fund, they will pool their money together to purchase properties on the market and then provide their private equity investors returns on that. REITs are real estate investment trusts. Pure funds are private equity real estate. And then you have seller financed and assumable mortgages. Seller financed is the owner acts as the bank and helps the buyer finance the property and collects the interest rate and the principal. So it's very advantageous for buyers that can't put a lot down, want a lower interest rate. And it's advantageous for the sellers because they get to collect interest and act as the bank. Assumable financing is great because you can assume their previous interest rate and just take over their loan and maybe give them a premium to the seller. That concludes everything. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section and I will do my best to answer them. Now, if you're licensed to practice real estate in the state of Florida and genuinely want to make this a career for yourself, don't hesitate to contact us using the link in the description bar. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope that this video's helped you understand a little bit more about the fundamentals of commercial real estate.